Welcome to Women's Wars, a podcast series from BIRN. I am Georgina Bame. For this series, I have interviewed 10 extraordinary women from countries that emerged from the former Yugoslavia. They are activists and journalists who were inspired by the wars of the 90s to take action to support the survivors and advocate for human rights. By telling their stories, these courageous women show how wars continue to have an impact on ordinary people decades after they were fought. In this episode of Women's Wars, Dijana Toska explains how, as an ethnic Albanian journalist, she faced threats, censorship and harassment from authorities in Pristina and Skopje before, during and after the wars that tore Yugoslavia apart. Dijana Toska did not set out to be a journalist. She studied law in Pristina, Kosovo in the early 80s, moving there from her native Skopje because opportunities for ethnic Albanian students in then Macedonia were restricted. Then in 1982, Toska received the offer that would change her life: to host a music program at the public broadcaster Radio Television of Pristina, which at the time broadcasted in Serbian but also Albanian, the dominant language in Kosovo.
This was my first contact with television, and after that I fell in love with journalism. It was by chance. I decided to study law, to be a lawyer, and to protect human rights.
The 1980s were a turbulent time in majority Albanian Kosovo, then an autonomous southern province of Serbia, itself a part of federal Yugoslavia. In 1981, when students in Pristina began protests calling for Kosovo to be granted the status of a Yugoslav republic, the Yugoslav authorities declared a state of emergency and sent in security forces to break up demonstrations that had begun to spread. Toska graduated in 1984 and devoted herself to journalism, becoming the host of a political talk show on Radio Television of Pristina. One show Toska hosted in 1990 will stay with her forever. The guests included Rahman Morina, an ethnic Albanian, and, as head of the Kosovo League of Communists, a Milosevic loyalist. Under Morina, authorities in Kosovo had declared a strike by ethnic Albanian miners in the Trevcha mining complex in northern Kosovo anti-state, but the miners were about and launched an underground hunger strike. The Serbian oppression was picking up pace.
I did interviews every Tuesday on all kinds of political issues. The one that stands out is an interview done for the first time on Pristina television, a live political debate that lasted 3.5 hours, with all the political leaders of the state. This debate sparked huge interest among people who could join and ask questions directly. This show made history. And before the show began, the leader of this political group, Rahman Morina, had requested some questions about Serbia and Milosevic not to be asked. Nonetheless, I asked a lot of questions about Milosevic, about Serbia. I asked the leader, Rahman, if his conscience was clear when it came to the murders being committed against the population in Kosovo, and this was a culmination of this debate. After control over television was increased, the party members requested for me to be imprisoned.
So you had immediate personal negative impacts.
After the show ended, we were immediately called to the director's office. There were all these interviews there. Rahman Morina received a call from Belgrade. He found an excuse that the questions could not be controlled because it was live. And after that, after 2 days, the meeting of the leadership was held with Ekrem Arifi, the head of the Communist League. And he told me that all the Serb members that were present requested your imprisonment. The control and the pressure, the editors' fear that we might be imprisoned continued. But I continued working until July 5th, when the Serbian forces entered and took control of the Pristina television. We were all dismissed. 1,300 workers were immediately put out of work. And all over Kosovo, as you know, 150,000 to 200,000 workers were fired and left unemployed. We gathered anyway. We were used to going to work, and we could gather in the Chava neighborhoods, in restaurants there as colleagues and talk. No one believed that we would not return soon to work. No one thought that until 1999 when the war started, we would find ways to survive, but we would be left jobless.
With Yugoslavia unraveling in war, Toska returned to her native Skopje in 1994 as the correspondent for Voice of America. Still, it was not easy. War was raging in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia, and tensions were building in Kosovo. Macedonia declared independence in 1991, but was still finding its way, trying to forge an identity as an independent state in which ethnic Albanians made up at least a quarter of the population.
When I started in 1994, it was the year of the transition when a pluralist system began in Macedonia. The constitution, however, determines the state as the state of the Macedonians, but the Macedonian, the official language. All the rest, even as Albanians, we were recognized only as minorities. Unfortunately, until 1996, although Macedonia was independent, it was a copy of Serbia. Everything that Milosevic did in terms of repressive measures in Kosovo, Macedonia applied to the ethnic Albanians. In 1995, when my accreditation in the government needed to be renewed, the Ministry of Information that existed at the time presented a letter to the American Embassy, and the letter said, Dijana Toska deals in activities against the state of Macedonia, and therefore there are no conditions to continue the accreditation for her to work. And I was called from the embassy and told they received a Stalinist notification from the government, but we stand strongly behind you and we are pleased with your work. You should continue to report. I continued to report, but the problem was that the institution was closed for me and I could not enter as a journalist in the government or in the parliament. Whenever I was in the parliament, I had to call an Albanian MP to come and pick me up at the entrance as a visitor to the parliament, and then the same thing at the government building. We, as a Voice of America, did not have an office. We worked from home, so for the interviews, I could call the guests to my home. I was prevented twice in the parliament from interviewing deputies, so the situation became difficult for me, and then the persecution from the State Secret Service began. They came to my home, they raided me, they invited me to informative conversation in 1995. But I informed Eles Biberai, the director of Voice America, for the reason, and I told him that tomorrow I am invited to an informative conversation, and he told me, you will go and I will notify the U.S. Embassy. And early in the morning I was told by the embassy to go and that they will wait around 1 p.m. If they didn't release me at 1:50 p.m., we will intervene. The first question from the state security when I went there was why I had the need to call the American Embassy. We called you here because of a talk. We communicate with you and your colleagues. We talk, we cooperate, they told me. And I told them, why do I need to cooperate with you? I am a journalist.
After the Secret Service interview, Toska and her family were checked and harassed every time they crossed the border. She was constantly followed. She resisted until 1996 when she saw the man who had been following her standing next to her mother and her 4-year-old nephew in a park.
For me, that was decisive because I could not endanger my nephew to that point. Because after 30 years, he was the first nephew in the family, and imagine if they had kidnapped my nephew. It would not be worth it.
After the 1998-99 Kosovo War, Toska and others were invited back to Kosovo to help reopen the public broadcaster. She did not last long, however, following an interview with Kosovo Albanian pacifist leader Ibrahim Rugova, who had become president of the self-proclaimed Republic of Kosovo in 1992 in elections that were not recognized by Serbia, and subsequently led a policy of passive resistance to Serbian repression until this was eclipsed by a guerrilla uprising in the late 90s.
I filmed the first show with President Rugova. All the arrangements were private, even the stage and all the organizing. My friends brought 2 stools to sit in the studio. We improvised the studio. But before I started, it was published in the print media that Rugova would be a guest in this show. Some commanders with guns had come. They said that you do not dare. They also pressured above the managing staff of the broadcaster. My colleagues had left because of fear. There was no one there to even bring me the questions. At the last moment, 2-3 colleagues came. President Rugova came with his entourage. The stage was not ready. We worked for 8 hours and there was electricity for only 2 hours. I got ready for the television facilities because it was not possible at home. It wasn't easy for me because the last time I had been live in the studio, it had been in 1990. After 10 years for me, and for the first time we returned with a show with the television of Pristina, I was nervous, even for the president because it was his first time in front of the public since the war. It was not allowed to call him president, but only the leader of the Democratic League of Kosovo, LDK. Nonetheless, the show was live, and I said, okay, but when the show started, I said, with me in the studio is the president of Kosovo, Dr. Ibrahim Rugova, and I continued throughout the show referring to him as president. When the show ended, all hell broke loose. In the morning, after I woke up, I saw that my car tires were punctured. The next day, Patan Hajiu referred to me as a nobody journalist who called a dead person president. I think it was an historic interview, also because it was the first one, and for what the president preached to preserve unity after the war and to commend the KLA and say that we gained the freedom, but now we must build together and have a plural unity. This did not happen. We gained liberty, but we have not built peace. Peace without justice is not a proper peace.
Do you think we'll continue not to have peace?
The fact that 25 years after the war, trust of the citizens in the courts and prosecution is at a minimal percentage. The fact that political parties are corrupted. The fault also lies a bit on the EULEX and UNMIK administration, because they did not allow the citizens of Kosovo society to build institutions, but came with different models from different states.
Thank you for listening. You can find more installments of our Women's War series in our website, balkaninsight.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.